The Urini were not warriors. They didn't conquer, didn't invade, they didn't even carry weapons. In their long and peaceful history, they had risen to prominence, not through strength, but through learning, through understanding. Their empire, if it could be called that, was a web of knowledge sharing, scientific partnership, and careful diplomacy. They had no borders, no capital world, only outposts and stations, each dedicated to a field of research, linked across the stars like a nervous system of pure thought. So when humanity was discovered, not encountered, but stumbled upon, the Urini responded the only way they knew how. They watched quietly, carefully. From a distance, Earth had made contact with the broader galactic community only recently. Not through peaceful treaties or exploratory science, but with a short burst of interference, an engine signature too loud, too primitive, and far too powerful. The ship that caused the disturbance burned itself out, entering unregulated space. The Urini were the first to arrive at the wreckage. They expected to find a desperate crew, perhaps lost refugees from a broken world. Instead, they found something far more confusing. A vessel held together with brute force and genius improvisation. Hull plating from at least 5 different alloys. Weapons fused to power sources that didn't belong to them. No standard command system, just handwritten code and handwritten repairs. And the crew, dead. But not because of system failure, because they had fought each other. Onboard logs, cracked open by Urini translators, revealed something strange. These weren't soldiers. They were explorers. But even in exploration, they had turned on one another. Power disputes, strategic disagreements, conflicts over control, and all of it had escalated, not gradually, but immediately. The Urini returned to their central archive and began pulling records. The name humanity meant nothing to them, but Earth. That planet had been flagged long ago, not as a threat, but as a curiosity, an unstable biosphere, a high-gravity well, a population with high variability in behavior. Had ever been made, they began to investigate. What they found unsettled them. Humanity's rise had not followed the usual pattern. Most civilizations advanced in cycles of learning, trade, experimentation. But humans, they advanced through struggle. Their greatest leaps in medicine came from plague. Their most powerful inventions were born in war. Every time they reached a peak of peace, they tore it down. The Urini couldn't understand it. Why would a species evolve this way? Why choose violence again and again? And yet, it wasn't a choice, not fully. The deeper the Urini looked, the more consistent the pattern became. Humanity's entire timeline was littered with conflicts that reshaped them, not just culturally, but fundamentally. And they adapted fast, faster than any species the Urini had studied, within generations. They could reshape their economies, their technology, even their ideologies, all in response to danger. The Urini wanted to believe it was just chaos, anomaly. But anomalies don't repeat, and human history was a rhythm, not random, predictable. From the first stones to orbital stations, every milestone had been pushed forward not by peace, but by pressure, by force, by threat. They didn't just survive adversity, they evolved through it. And the more the Urini saw, the more uncomfortable they became. Because if this pattern was true, if humans really were shaped by violence, then what happened when they ran out of enemies? What would they become when no external threat remained? And what if, just what if, this wasn't evolution by accident? What if this was intentional? The Urini were disturbed, but not yet afraid. After all, many species had violent beginnings. Early survival often depended on aggression. Predators, competition for food, unstable environments, all could explain outbursts of conflict. So they gave humanity the benefit of the doubt. They shifted their focus to Earth's early global history. Perhaps, they thought, as humanity matured, they learned from those ancient mistakes. What they found instead was the Great War. The Urini had no term for it in their own language. The concept didn't translate cleanly. But in human records, it was clear enough to massive factions. Dozens of nations pulled in by alliances. Pride and fear, tens of millions. Dead. Fought with weapons that turned entire landscapes to ash. Trenches that stretched for miles. Machines that consumed lives as quickly as they consumed fuel. And when it ended, it didn't end. Barely 2 decades later, humanity launched itself into another world-consuming war. Larger, deadlier, driven not just by politics, but ideology, hatred, and industry. The Urini were stunned. No species they had ever studied had fought back-to-back extinctionally wars and survived, let alone grown stronger afterward. But humans had. After the Second War, they rebuilt. Faster than before. Technology. Exploded medical breakthroughs, engineering revolutions, nuclear energy, space. Exploration, all within the same breath of time that most civilizations took to recover from a single planetary conflict. The Urini didn't understand. How could a species accelerate after such trauma? Most beings broke, most cultures fractured, but humanity adapted. They folded trauma into progress, loss into momentum. Every war, every devastation became fuel. The Urini weren't just confused now. They were unsettled, so they dug deeper. They mapped out all of humanity's major conflicts over thousands of years. From local tribal disputes to full-scale global warfare, the pattern held. There was always a trigger. Scarcity, ideology, pride. There was always a resolution. Destruction. But afterward, evolution. Not just technological, biological populations. Born during wars had measurably higher stress tolerance. Improved. Reflexes, faster learning curves, and high pressure. Situations, these weren't anomalies. They were consistencies. War didn't weaken humanity, it sharpened them. The Urini compiled their findings, presented them to the wider scientific network. Most dismissed it as coincidence. They're just adaptable. It's a side effect of chaos. Every species fights. Humans just record it more vividly. Began to worry, because the more you tried to explain it away, the clearer it became. Humanity didn't just survive violence, it grew from it. And once you understood that, the next question was far more terrifying. What happens if they learn to stop fighting each other? Because if they turned that same adaptability toward unity, if they ever stopped burning their strength on internal wars, what would they become then? Would the rest of the galaxy be ready? The Urini wanted to believe it was all random. That war was just a side effect of being emotional. That humans simply hadn't evolved out of their own fear and insecurity. But patterns don't lie. And what they found in human history wasn't randomness. It was rhythm. War wasn't something that happened to humanity. It was something that repeated within them, not in perfect cycles. Not like clockwork, but with enough consistency to stand out. A golden age followed by tension. Tension followed by ignition. Ignition followed by reinvention. Every time the species pushed forward, it wasn't through comfort. It was through collapse. Empires rose. Collapsed coalitions formed. Fractured. And each time, what came after was stronger. Not necessarily kinder. Not wiser. But faster. Sharper. More capable. The Urini studied how humans responded to loss, to failure, to being attacked, and time after time. They came back harder. They didn't just recover, they adapted. They learned how to prevent that kind of failure again. But instead of avoiding war, they became better at it. They industrialized it. They built systems that made war. Efficient supply chains, communication protocols, rank. Structures, then came simulation, war games, training that mimicked death. So the real thing wouldn't be a surprise. Entire generations were raised with the knowledge of how to destroy and how to rebuild afterward. The Urini couldn't find anything like it in the history of any other known species. Most intelligent. Life turned away from violence once it reached a certain point. Peace followed technology. Wisdom followed pain. But humanity. They seemed to use pain as a guide, as if conflict was how they understood themselves. The Urini ran probability models. What if the wars hadn't happened? What if peace had lasted? Simulations were clear. Humanity would have advanced slower, significantly slower. Their breakthroughs were tied directly to pressure. It's a kind of pressure that only came from danger or death, and yet they thrived in it. Not all of them. Not equally, but as a whole. The species didn't just endure trauma. It processed it, absorbed it, used it, turned it into momentum. That's when the Urini stopped treating humanity like an emerging power and started treating them like a phenomenon. They weren't just another species clawing its way into space. They were something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. Because they kept going, through wars that should have ended them, through losses that had broken any other species, through disasters, natural, internal, external, that seemed designed to wipe them out. But every time the Urini expected to see the line end, it kept climbing. That's when one researcher said it out loud, quiet voice in a meeting full of silence. This isn't chaos. This is design. At first, no one responded because that thought was terrifying. If it was design. If humanity wasn't just prone to war but intended for it, then who or what had intended it? Had they done it to themselves? Was it a mistake? Or had something made them this way? History could be argued with. Records could be interpreted in different ways. Timelines could be debated. Motivations rewritten, so the Urini turned to something that couldn't be forged or fabricated. Biology. They had obtained genetic samples from recovered human remains. Crude tissue preserved poorly by exposure, but enough to run a comparative analysis. At first, the results seemed unremarkable. A mammalian species, warm-blooded, complex nervous system, dense skeletal structure, reasonably efficient organ layout, higher than average, neuropalastated, all within expected variance for sapient life. But then, the anomalies began. The first alarm came from the stress response. Human beings, under extreme pressure, didn't deteriorate the way most sentient life did. Their brain chemistry adapted, their pain thresholds shifted. Hormonal systems didn't just tolerate hardship, they thrived in it. Not for everyone, not without cost, but consistently, across samples and records, it was clear. When faced with prolonged physical or psychological strain, human physiology changed rapidly. Adrenal output increased, but remained balanced. Reflex response accelerated. Cognitive function narrowed, sharpened. Toward action. This wasn't random. It was too stable, too reliable. The Urini checked for mutations, evolutionary pressures, environmental explanations. But the deeper they looked, the more disturbing it became. It wasn't just that. Humans adapted to violence. They were engineered to grow stronger through it. Cells became more efficient. Under duress, muscle density increased with resistance. Memory retention improved when survival was on the line. And most terrifying of all, the genetic coding wasn't wildly variable. It was refined, as if it had been trimmed and retrimmed. Across countless generations, like something had been selected over and over again for battle readiness. Somehow, deep in their DNA, humans were equipped for a level of endurance most species couldn't even imagine. Their immune systems could recover from wounds that would cripple others. Their mental faculties could compartmentalize trauma in ways the Urini had never seen, not perfectly, not cleanly, but effectively. Even when they broke, they rebuilt. Scarred, perhaps, but moving forward. Always forward. It wasn't just physical. Emotion played a role too. Humans, bonded in stress, they formed stronger social units in war zones than they did in peace. Fear, loss, pain, it connected them. And when connection failed, they fell back on sheer instinct. Push forward, hold the line, adapt, survive, repeat. The Urini scientists grew quiet, one by one. They stepped back from their terminals and tried to process what they were seeing. This wasn't a species designed to avoid destruction. It was a species forged in it. Their worst moments produced their greatest leaps. Their darkest chapters refined their brightest minds. And now, they weren't just surviving. They were expanding into space, into places where the next conflict wouldn't be with themselves, but with others. Others who weren't built the same way. Others who had evolved through peace, consensus, and caution. The Urini weren't afraid of human weapons. They were afraid of what the humans were without them. Because now, they understood. The greatest weapon Earth had ever created was the human body itself. The data was too precise, too consistent. The more the Urini analyzed, the less sense it made as a product of random evolution. Most species developed gradually trial and error, natural selection through peaceful cycles of time, but not humans. Their genetic progression read like a blueprint. Their cultural responses to trauma resembled engineered stress tests, and their ability to adapt under pressure. It mirrored an algorithm, not natural chaos, planned refinement. That's when the Urini proposed a theory that sent a cold ripple through their scientific network. What if humanity was not simply a product of nature, but the result of intervention? It wasn't a conclusion reached lightly. The Urini were not a superstitious people. They didn't believe in myths or divine creation, but this was different. They began comparing Earth's evolutionary timeline to other species across the known galaxy, and the anomalies piled up. Humanity had risen too fast, endured too much, developed too many behaviors, optimized for survival under fire. No other species had combined cognitive flexibility, emotional adaptability, physical resilience at such a high level, all while being so chaotic. And yet, worked. If they had been a natural evolutionary branch, it would have collapsed. The pressure would have broken them, but humans didn't break. They absorbed. Every collapse was used as fuel. Every disaster, a turning point. It was unnatural, unless someone made it that way. The Urini dug into old Terran mythologies, religious texts, folk stories, pre-space legends. They found something curious. Tales of watchers, creators, beings that came from the sky. Figures that gave fire, knowledge, even war. Always in shadow, always forgotten once the next age began. Could these have been metaphors? Were they distorted memories of something very real? Someone, or something, interfered in Earth's early development? Had humans been shaped, not by one event, but slowly, deliberately? The Urini looked for traces of other civilizations in Earth's vicinity from ancient times, signals, artifacts, anything to support the theory. They found nothing conclusive. Only an old, unexplained echo. A background distortion that appeared deep beneath Earth's atmosphere. Buried in the radiation belts, something that didn't match natural planetary signals. It pulsed at intervals far too regular to be environmental. It wasn't strong enough to send a message, but it was consistent. Like a beacon, long forgotten still. Active, still waiting. Whatever it was, it had been transmitting for millennia. The Urini marked it as a deep-time artifact. Something possibly older than human civilization itself. And suddenly, the pieces began to fit. Maybe humanity had been left behind, not as a mistake, not as a primitive outpost, but as a seed, a contingency dot. A failsafe, one that would only flourish under fire, one that would grow stronger with every war. A backup species designed to endure when others could not, built for war, so the galaxy could be reminded what survival really looked like. If that was true, if the humans were a project, then who had made them? Why had they never come back? The Urini considered contacting Earth directly, but the thought chilled them. Because if the creators never returned, perhaps they didn't need to. Perhaps the project was complete. And perhaps, just perhaps, it had finally activated. The Urini had one final question. One they had avoided. One they did not want to answer. But science does not allow comfort. So they asked, what happens if humans stop fighting each other? For as long as anyone had observed them, humanity had been divided by borders, beliefs, history, identity, wars upon wars, not just between nations, but within them. The Urini thought this was their weakness, but the deeper they looked, the more it resembled something else. A pressure valve, infighting. Kept them busy, it prevented unity, and unity they feared would not mean peace, it would mean focus. So, they ran a model, not a simple one. They fed thousands of years of human behavior into one of the most advanced predictive systems in the Urini Confederacy. An AI model trained on diplomatic patterns, or probabilities, psychological adaptation, and civilizational growth curves. The AI processed for days. When it finished, the results were clear. If human civilization unified, politically, culturally, militarily, the following events were projected to occur in quick succession. Technological acceleration, no more duplicated efforts, no wasted resources. Scientific advancement would explode, with military and space exploration technologies at the front. Expansion beyond nearby systems. Not cautiously, as most species did. Aggressively, purposefully, humanity would move fast. Not to trade, but to understand and secure. Militarization of void sectors. Regions of the galaxy considered too dangerous, too chaotic, humanity would claim them, in fear, but because they were difficult, and humans seek out difficulty. Strategic dominance within 5 galactic cycles. The simulation showed that once unified, humans wouldn't just be powerful, they would be unmatched. The model's margin of error was small. The outcome was not a possibility. It was a trajectory. The only thing preventing it from happening, now, was disunity that the Urini realized, was the galaxy's only protection. The humans were too busy with each other to look outward, to notice how soft the galaxy had grown, but that wouldn't last forever. They were already exploring already, settling and slowly, already cooperating. Not fully, not completely, but enough. The seeds of unification had been planted. Shared enemies, shared resources, shared goals. Once that spark caught, there would be no stopping it. And when that happened, the rest of the galaxy would not be able to slow them down. The Urini did not fear conquest. They feared what would come after, because humanity didn't build empires the way others did. They rebuilt themselves after every fall, and when they stopped falling, when they stopped tearing each other apart, that momentum would go somewhere, and the galaxy, for all its wisdom, was not prepared for that, because they had mistaken chaos for weakness. They had mistaken violence for instability. But in truth, humanity's worst moments were just rehearsal. The real performance had not yet begun, and when it did, there would be no intermission. It started with a drop in transmissions. Earth had always been loud, noisy, messy, constant, even. When the rest of the galaxy operated on tight beam comms and encrypted pathways, humanity's chatter filled the ether like static from a broken machine. Civilian broadcasts, military pings, corporate transactions, music, politics, arguments, noise. Then suddenly, it stopped. No announcement, no global catastrophe, just silence. First, it was dismissed as technical failure, a glitch in the relay nodes, solar interference, a misalignment of deep space sensors. But one by one, the other observers confirmed that Earth had gone quiet. So had the lunar habitats, so had every known Terran outpost from the Sol system. To the outer fringe, no response to standard queries, no emergency beacons, not even automated status reports. Just nothing. The Urini sent a probe. It vanished. Not destroyed. It's not hijacked. Just no longer detectable. Other observers tried. Same result. A perfect, unnatural silence had settled around humanity. Not a shutdown, but a withdrawal. And it was coordinated. Every piece of public communication, Ended private channels? Cut trade, frozen patrol ships? Grounded, even scientific data stopped flowing? And yet, our signatures remained. Energy readings from orbit showed normal activity. Ships still moved. Infrastructure stayed online, but no. One spoke. It was as if a curtain had dropped across the entire species. The Yarini. Didn't know what to make of it. There was no war. On Earth, no sign of collapse. But something had changed. Something had shifted in the structure. Something subtle, invisible from the outside. And then they remembered the model, the prediction, the one thing that had kept the galaxy safe. Humanity's inability to agree with itself. That was the buffer, the delay. And now the buffer was gone. If they had gone. Silent, it was not because they had fallen. It was because they had a line dot. And when a species built for war goes quiet, it does not mean peace. It means the thinking has started, the planning, the redirecting of all that chaos, all that energy, into something more dangerous than any weapon. Purpose. The Yarini convened an emergency council. Some called for diplomacy, others for preemptive defense, but most just sat in silence, staring at the darkened data streams, knowing deep down this wasn't the end of something. This was the beginning. There was no warning shot, no fleet, no ultimatum, just a transmission. One line sent across the deep channels, not encrypted, not disguised, clear, unmistakable. We remember, came from Sol, the origin point of humanity, the cradle of their wars, their progress, their pain, and now. It was the source of something new, something the Yarini could only describe as awareness. Because this was not the same species they had studied. This was not the fractured world of noise and contradiction. This was something else, something focused. They never found out who sent the message. It carried no designation, no rank, no name, but it spoke with one voice, and the galaxy listened across every listening post, every outpost, every archive and silent monitoring station. The reaction was the same: stillness, disbelief, and then fear, because the data confirmed what many had tried to deny. Humanity had unified. Not perfectly, not under a flag, but under understanding. The noise was gone. The signal was sharp, and with it came the weight of every unanswered distress call humanity had ever sent into the void, the refugee cries no one had heard, the threats no one had answered, the pleas that had gone unnoticed because Earth, for all its fire, had not yet been considered worth the risk. Now, the risk had changed, and the Yarini, more than any, knew it. They had seen the pattern. They had mapped the genome. They had run the simulations. And now, standing at the edge of something too large to control, they came to a single conclusion. Humanity had not been a mistake. They had not been a deviation. They had not simply evolved in chaos. They had been allowed to grow in the cracks of a galaxy that no longer knew how to fight for itself. And now that they had grown, the question wasn't whether they would attack humanity. It never needed to conquer. They only needed to endure. And now they had done that. Through centuries of war, silence, exile, loss, and emerged as something the galaxy no longer recognized. Not a weapon, not a species, a force, a sentient, evolving force built not for destruction, but for survival through destruction. And there was no protocol for that. The Yarini archived their findings, not in public databases, not in shared research. They sealed it deep. Behind encryption walls, marked it simply: do not engage. Because they knew now that the humans were no longer looking at each other. They would begin to look outward, and what they saw would shape the next age of the galaxy. Not with fleets, not with conquest, but with a quiet, terrifying clarity. You didn't come when we were weak. So now we come on our own terms. Some say it began with Earth. Others say the Revenant warships, the ghost stories, the myths, were never myths at all. Some claim it's already too late, that humanity has reached the tipping point, where the next chapter won't be written in debate halls or negotiation chambers, but in action, clean, purposeful, decided, not to punish, not even to protect, but because that's what they were made to do, not by gods, not by ancient engineers, but by pain, refined over generations, tempered by conflict, hardened by abandonment. Now, forged into something the stars themselves had forgotten how to reckon with, a species that no longer feared war, because they had already lived through the worst of it and become something stronger, something the galaxy now had to face. Fall before.